It's the Real News Network. I'm Greg Wilpert, coming to you from Quito, Ecuador. Last Friday, the Department of Homeland Security announced that temporary protected status, also known as TPS, of about 57,000 Hondurans will be canceled. Hondurans now have until January 2020 to leave the United States. They were first granted TPS back in 1999, following the massive destruction that Hurricane Mitch caused in Honduras in 1998. This means that most Hondurans under TPS have been in the US for 20 years now, and they have an estimated 53,000 US-born US citizens' children. With the cancellation of Honduras's TPS, so far the Trump administration has canceled TPS for over 400,000 refugees from El Salvador, Nicaragua, Haiti, Nepal, and Sudan. Joining me to discuss the implications of this latest immigration decision on the part of the Trump administration is Marselha Gonçalves Margerin. She is the Advocacy Director for the Americas at Amnesty International USA. Thanks for joining us again, Marselha.
Thank you, Greg.
So the Trump administration says that TPS for Honduras is no longer justified because the devastation that Hurricane Mitch caused in 1998 has now been overcome. What's your reaction to this argument? What is the situation in Honduras now, and what would Hondurans face if they return to their former home country?
So just a clarification, not everybody who has TPS automatically are asylum seekers, are refugees. They would have to have 1 year to be able to file asylum if they want to. Whereas maybe most of the hurricane conditions might have superseded, the conditions on the ground currently in Honduras is very difficult, and would mean that a lot of people coming back, especially if they recognize that returnees from the United States, they could be target for extortion, threats, kidnapping, and even death. What happens in Honduras, similarly to Haiti and El Salvador, as the United States decision is not really based on current facts on the ground. The conditions changed, and certain groups are changed, and certain groups are very vulnerable to the current situation on the ground. In Honduras, so we knew this was coming, but this decision is not based on real facts. People can be in real danger if they are sent back.
I understand also that Honduras is has the greatest rates of inequality and violence, and not only that, we also had an election that has been hotly contested where lots of people claimed fraud. What kind of an impact will all of that have on them returning there?
So what does it mean to be one of the most violent countries in the world? Is that you have homicide indexes higher sometimes at war zones, and that the justice system is not there protecting people. So it's different than we say, well, we have violence in Baltimore and in other countries, in Chicago and other cities in the United States. But even though this justice system here is flawed, is not perfect, we know that there are serious problems, it still delivers some justice. When we're talking about high levels of violence, is that most of that violence and any crime against persons, most of it are left unresolved. So a woman that is raped, there are very few recourses for her case. In countries like El Salvador, for instance, they can be put in jail for a miscarriage. The situation for Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala is one of the most dangerous places for women and femicide crimes. And people of LGBT identity, they are also the index of the number of assassinations and threats to people who identify themselves as trans or LGBTQ. They have serious threats. So when we talk about every person individually, they have the right to request asylum, and a judge have to analyze that case individually. So for people in the United States that are removed from that protective status, there are people trying to leave the country, because of this threat. And as I mentioned before, just by the fact of being recognized as returnees of the United States, they can have higher level of threats against them given the situation on the ground. Certainly the political instability in the country since December just makes things real hard, as people who have, the Amnesty International have documented that more than 30 people have been killed during protests in December. We have received report of arbitrary detention, and we have documented that people who protest the right of environment and land, they have been killed and threatened. And there is, so depending on the group of individuals, you are at a higher threat if you're returned. Not mentioning that there are more than 50,000 US children born here. What you're gonna do, you are separating and disrupting entire families. It's really important that everybody that had TPS status have the opportunity to file for asylum and that have that case analyzed as well.
So yes, you mentioned that that this is affecting, of course, over 50,000 children who are born to the Honduras. So altogether, if you include the ones who are on TPS status plus their children, it's over 100,000 people at least. And so as a result, many of the Hondurans, according to most reports, say that they prefer to face undocumented status in the US than returning to Honduras. What would you say does this mean for them, for those who decide to remain past January 2020?
Well, this administration is putting people who have been legally here contributing to society and US children in serious dangers and making them go underground. People have established families here, and instead of moving hundreds of thousands, because we are talking about Honduras, but they are El Salvadorians, Haitians, and amongst them you have almost 500,000 population in the United States that you were turning families apart. There has been several business that had come and asked the US administration and show how this actually would be detrimental to their business. There are a lot of Honduras and El Salvadorians here in the DC area, and the business here and the whole communities will be severely impacted. So most of people here are contributing to society. What would this administration gain by separating and rupturing families and disrupting whole communities and putting people in illegality? So that's certainly something that is not beneficial to anybody, regardless where they are born.
Let's turn to the legal issues that are involved. Under international law, what responsibilities does the United States have with regard to people who came to the U.S. as refugees from a disaster such as Hurricane Mitch? I mean, you mentioned earlier that the issue of asylum, but I mean, they've been here for 20 years. Does the U.S. have any responsibility to these people?
Well, so the United States received these individuals under this humanitarian visa, which is not a refugee status. And in the legislation for TPS, unfortunately, does not allow for permanent residency. So there are problems, you know, this could be fixed administratively or by law, legislation, if there was willingness in Congress to actually grant a path to citizenship for people who have created their families here and contributed to society for 2 decades. There's certainly, but you need a willingness to do that. Also, the administration could actually legitimately consider the conditions on the ground. What the United States president and administration are doing now is actually, regardless of the real situation on the ground, they are just removing these humanitarian relief that they had given. This is a very, very dangerous pattern that we have been documenting and denouncing since the beginning of the Trump administration. It's a whole attack on the asylum and refugee and immigration system. This administration have been destroying pieces and pieces and attack pieces by pieces. Just yesterday, Attorney General Sessions announced that they will be detaining and separating officially children for their parents at the border. And this is a serious breach of international law as well. So what this administration is doing, what have been documented as arbitrary, illegal implementation of the law, they are now trying to make this illegality of separating families, refusing people to receive asylum, ignoring conditions on the ground and sending people back to danger or even their death. They are trying to put these in the law and make these the law of the land. Amnesty International and its members all over the world will continue fighting and calling their members of Congress to fix this and not to allow this administration to destroy the protection system and the laws of the United States.
Okay, well, we'll continue to follow this story, of course, but we have to leave it there for now. I was speaking to Marselha Gonçalves Margerin, Advocacy Director for the Americas at Amnesty International USA. Thanks again for having joined us today, Marselha.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining the Real News Network.